After months of rumours and speculation, God of War was finally shown off for the first time at this year's E3. The gameplay demo now has over 10 million views on YouTube and has become the #1 most watched gameplay video from E3, beating even Battlefield 1. What's crazy to me is that it wasn't even this giant action set piece, but a quieter, more character-driven section of the game instead. And considering it was with Kratos of all people, who is often criticised for being two-dimensional, I'd say it was a rousing success. I would also like to thank you guys for the amount of support on my gameplay analysis video, which now has over 2,000 views, and even my God of War fan theory vid reached over 3,000, which is insane for this channel. So rest assured, God of War will be a big focus for the channel moving forward. As well as going over all of the information that has been revealed since my last video, my main goal with this one is to really help to paint a picture of the potential world that we will be exploring in this new God of War game. We'll be going over the tidbits of information that we have been given about the story, potential characters, possible locations and bosses, some fan theories, and the gameplay itself. I was originally going to split them into separate videos, but then I decided to condense them all into one, hence the delay. This is intended to be a supplementary video to the gameplay analysis that I did after E3, because I didn't want to repeat myself too much. I would recommend that you go watch that one first, which is linked down in the description just in case you miss out on a few details. So without further ado, let's get started. Everything is essentially being reimagined other than Kratos himself, which explains why they didn't want to add a number to this one. In many ways, they are treating it like the first game in the series, so I can see why they are sticking with just God of War, but I would still prefer a colon and subtitle to be added. On the topic of the changes they've made, it seems like Linda Hunt won't be coming back to narrate the story, which I am going to sorely miss, but it makes sense why. She had always been Gaia, and even in God of War 3, they stopped using her after she died. That's not to say that she can't be another character in this new world, but I think having a narrator was another thing they decided to strip away for the sake of doing something different. I also think it's fair to say that there will be no sex minigames anymore, as it wouldn't make sense for the person that Kratos is right now, and tonally it wouldn't really fit. Besides, I don't really see what else you could do with it, and this was probably why it was omitted from Ascension altogether. We were also given hints as to what happened after the events of God of War 3. Kratos finds out that he'll never be able to die, and he becomes a tragic immortal figure that is forced to walk the earth as his punishment. Perhaps Athena didn't want to grant him the peaceful death that he wanted by making him immortal. After wandering alone for a long period of time, he ends up in Scandinavia, which is where Norse mythology comes in. Yes, that's right, both Greek and Norse mythological belief systems coexisted with each other, merely being separated by geography. The idea of both pantheons of gods coexisting isn't actually a novel concept and has been attempted before. It was done in the Hercules TV show from the 90s that I grew up watching, which some of you might remember. The 5th season saw him travel to Scandinavia to help the Norse god Balder, with the antagonist of that story being Loki. Hercules also met Thor and Odin along the way. Funnily enough, the actor who portrayed Hercules in that show, Kevin Sorbo, also went on to voice him in both God of War 3 and Ascension, so maybe it was always meant to be for those mythologies to be mixed.
Go home, Greek. This is none of your business.
Isn't that for your brother to decide?
While his son knows about Kratos' lineage and where he comes from, he doesn't know about his past and what he did. So he doesn't know about Calliope, though I'm willing to bet that he finds out what's happened to her eventually. In a new interview with EPN.TV, it was hinted by Cory that scenes from the previous games might be recreated in the new engine. The scene that I personally want to see recreated is the night that Kratos killed his family and had their ashes put on his skin. This would be from his son's perspective as he explores the village while it is under siege, and it could be a potentially powerful scene with his son witnessing firsthand just how much of a monster his father used to be. When he talked about recreating certain scenes from other games, he could have also been referring to Kratos' nightmares, since they were never taken away to my knowledge and are probably even worse than they used to be. Kratos still being haunted by his past would also make the weight of immortality even heavier for him. Contrary to what others are saying, I think it's pretty much a given that Kratos won't die in this game and pass the mantle on to his son. Cory Barlog acknowledged the fact that God of War is Kratos and Kratos is God of War. The way he talked about it at E3 suggests he won't be killed off. He said that this was going to be the second act of Kratos' story and that the stories set in the Greek mythos were part of the first act. And as I said in my previous video, the buddy system is going to play a huge part in the game, so it's safe to say that his son won't die either. I can actually see both Kratos and his son being the protagonists for a whole trilogy, with his son being a teenager in the second and a young adult in the third. They said that while they ultimately decided to go Norse, the other half of the team were originally working on Egyptian mythology, as they knew they wanted to tackle a different one from the very beginning. They ended up going with Norse because they wanted to focus more on Kratos, which the convoluted politics of ancient Egypt wouldn't have allowed them to do. If they had said this before they showed this different Kratos, it's funny to think of how negatively people would have reacted. Despite what they said, I'm still kind of bummed, as ancient Egypt was my first choice, though I'm perfectly happy with it going Norse. It was confirmed that there will be no morality system in the game, nor will there be branching paths in the story. There is a very specific journey for Kratos and his son to go on, and a hard-earned relationship that will develop between them over the course of the game. I am expecting a much darker, grittier take on Norse mythology in this game than anything else we have ever seen before. The world around them is said to be incredibly hostile, which we will explore later on in this video. The mother of his son is apparently a critical part of the story, which tells me that she might be a Norse goddess. Furthermore, the fact that they didn't want to reveal the name of Kratos' son means that it's likely he won't be a completely original character like Kratos was. It'll probably be a lesser known one because it grants them greater creative liberties with what they can do, and this brings me on to the first fan theory. The most popular one is that Kratos' son is Ulla, and this comes by courtesy of Reddit user J.E. Merck. Ulla was said to be an excellent archer and hunter, so you can start to see the similarities. He is also associated with the Iwas rune, which means yew tree. Yew trees are used to make bows for archers, and you can even see this rune on the God of War logo at the end of the trailer. Things then got even juicier when it was said that Ulla's father was unknown, even though Sif was his mother and she was married to Thor. Odin at one point even referred to Sif having a lover at home, which could very well have been Kratos. So it's speculated that Thor might be the one who is trying to kill them because of his anger over the affair that Kratos had with his wife. Ulla was an exceptionally prominent figure among the Norse gods, but it isn't really known why, which is perfect because it means they can do whatever they really want with him. Not much is really known about Sif either, other than the fact that she was Thor's wife and who her children were. With all of the talk about Ulla, I think people were missing the most obvious candidate, and that is the actual Norse god of war Tyr. There are even those who interpret Tyr as being a version of the Norse god Ulla, who was also quite warlike. Tyr appealed to not only matters of war, but also in matters involving law, justice, honour and oaths. So as you can see, the Norse god of war was very different to the Greek god of war, which makes it very convenient for slotting in Kratos' redemption arc. And guess what his rune looks like? It's in the shape of an arrow pointed upward towards the heavens, and it looks suspiciously similar to that icon in the top left hand corner of the gameplay demo. In the two poetic versions of Ragnarok, which is basically a series of events that bring about the end of the Norse gods, Tyr is unmentioned, and this has led some to speculate that he is the Mighty One. This figure was said to be a ruler mightier than Odin himself, who emerges from the court of the gods to rule over everything after Ragnarok. Unlike Odin, who had more to do with magic and cunning, Tyr was heavily associated with law, justice and honour. The game will revolve around Kratos trying to teach his son how to be a proper god, so this could be the result of the teachings from a now reformed Kratos, which could very well end up in his son being the Mighty One. Additionally, in the time before the Viking Age, it was Tyr who was seen as the highest god instead of Odin. Given the fact that both Ulla and Tyr are quite obscure gods, they would be able to easily get away with mixing the two. So even if his name is Tyr, he might have some of the characteristics and history of Ulla. But there is also one more thing about his son that I think is true, and that is the fact that I think it is initially prophesized that it is his son who will bring about Ragnarok. I mean, think about it, this goes all the way down to his grandfather Zeus. Kronos was terrified of a prophecy that said that one of his children would one day usurp the throne and bring about the end of the rule of the Titans, which was what ended up happening. The exact same thing then happened between Zeus and Kratos, which Athena brought up at the end of God of War 2, and this was emphasized in Ghost of Sparta when a prophecy foretold of a marked warrior bringing about the end of the Greek gods. Kratos was essentially carrying on the legacy that dropped down on him from his father before he decided to stop and make a change. And I'm sure it will be talked about in the game, and it was something that Cory Barlog even brought up in an interview. So it would be quite fitting to have the cycle carry on with Kratos' son, and it makes Kratos' fear of what he may have passed on to him all the more tangible. Kratos doesn't want to repeat the same mistakes his father made, and controlling his rage will be central to this.
You will never be the ruler of Olympus. The cycle ends here.
It would also make sense for the trouble to come to Kratos instead this time around, since it looks like he would otherwise be content with living a peaceful life. Ragnarok is a huge part of Norse mythology, and it is said that the Norse gods have always known that their reign isn't going to be eternal. But despite knowing that it was going to happen, they still did everything in their power to stop it from happening and prepared for it just in case. This would give a reason for Odin to hunt the boy, while Thor is unhappy with this illegitimate child that his wife gave birth to. I have seen the theory that the story will be about the journey that Kratos takes to become Odin, but I don't buy into it at all for a number of reasons. There are things in the demo that indicate the Norse gods are already out there, including Odin himself. The real Odin in Norse mythology is also very different to the one that people know, and I fully expect Sony Santa Monica to tap into this. Kratos doesn't even understand ancient Norse, with his son having to translate everything for him. Kratos not being Odin would also suggest that there is this whole other fleshed out world to discover, which sounds way more appealing to me. Kratos was referred to as a stranger in a strange land, experiencing the world in the same way as the player, and trying to figure out what is going on, which is another reason why I don't think he'll become the Allfather. When you think back to what made the story of God of War 2 so great, and why I think it was the best in the series, it was because it was all about perspective. It wasn't a black and white story, and everyone was flawed but had good reasons for their actions. The first thing that Kratos asked for in exchange for killing Ares was his nightmares to be taken away, which never happened, while in the eyes of the gods, making him the God of War was the highest honour he could have been granted. Then you have the Titans who wanted revenge on Zeus for taking out his anger at Kronos on all of them, despite the fact that they protected Zeus from him. The gods were jealous, vengeful, greedy, hubristic, all human characteristics, which is why I think we enjoy these mythological stories so much. Telling a story with the Norse gods would be severely limited if Kratos was Odin, because it means that a lot of them wouldn't even exist yet. Having all of these gods and monsters allows them to weave a more complicated web of intrigue that can build on what they established with God of War 2 even further. In modern popular culture, Odin is usually portrayed as this honourable wise ruler, but he was nothing like this to the ancient Norse. Going down this path would also help the developer differentiate this new universe from what's preceded it. Odin was more of a warmongering trickster who was willing to sacrifice almost anything in his never-ending pursuits for more knowledge, wisdom and power. So much so that he sacrificed one of his eyes in order to drink from the well of Mimir for wisdom. Mimir was said to be one of the wisest gods, and the reason why was because he drank from this well that housed one of the roots of the world tree Yggdrasil in Jotunheim, the land of the giants. One of the main reasons why Odin sought more knowledge was in order to try to prevent the destruction of the gods and the world that he created. Apparently Odin was obsessed with Ragnarok. He would try anything to gain more knowledge, even if this meant resorting to betrayal, deception and murder.
We gods of the north received a prophecy. We were warned to beware 3 tragedies whose coming would precede the day of Ragnarok, the final war of the gods.
He had little regard for values such as justice, fairness or respect for law and convention, and he was the divine patron of outcasts as well as rulers. Overall, it would make pretty good material for a great antagonist. His anarchic ways got so out of control once that he was even banished from Asgard at one point while Ullr took over. This was probably little punishment for him though, since it was said that he often spent his time on long solitary wanderings throughout the 9 realms on purely self-interested quests. Cory said that this will be a time when the gods walk to the earth, which fits in well with this, so it's pretty much a given that we'll have an encounter with him at some point outside of Asgard. The fact that Scandinavia even exists in this world can be attributed to Odin, since it was said that he slew the primordial being Ymir, the forefather to the frost giants, and fashioned the cosmos from his corpse. The rune at the bottom of the logo is known as the Manar's rune. It symbolises the divine structure between gods and man and is frequently associated with Odin. Odin was actually the founder of the runic alphabet, which you can see multiple times throughout the demo. One of the 3 roots of Yggdrasil extends into Asgard and is nourished by the Well of Erd, which is this reservoir of all ongoing and completed actions. It houses many of the most powerful beings in the cosmos. Among these beings are the Norns, who are essentially the Fates from Greek mythology. They were the ones who told Odin about Ragnarok and that he was doomed to die. They would shape the destiny of every living thing by carving these runes into the trunk of the world tree.
That's a question for the Norns.
The who?
They keep a book in which all things are recorded.
Oh, in Greece we call them the Fates.
The runes are an extremely powerful source of magic if one knows how to use them, so they are more than just a representation of language, hence why Odin went so far to seek them out. The rune's native home was in the Well of Erd, which might as well be called the Well of Destiny. This is where the Norns lived, and the runes would not reveal themselves to anyone, but only those who proved worthy of such insights and abilities. So Odin pierced himself with his spear Gungnir and hung himself from a branch of the world tree, peering down into the shadowy waters of the well for 9 nights without food or drink. The runes finally accepted his sacrifice and revealed their shapes and the secrets within them. Equipped with the knowledge of how to wield them, he was able to accomplish all sorts of feats like healing wounds, binding enemies, rendering their weapons worthless, and protecting his allies in battle, which might very well end up being magical abilities in the game. He could even use his knowledge of the runes to wake the dead so that he could find out what they knew and to try and predict the future. Odin was also one of the greatest practitioners of shamanism, which meant that he was accompanied by many familiar spirits. These included the ravens Hugin and Munin, the wolves Geri and Freki, and the Valkyries. The Valkyries decide which of the warriors that die in battle are worthy of going to Valhalla. Valhalla was directly mentioned in the demo, which again suggests that everything in this world has already been established, and it indirectly confirms that Odin is out there, since Valhalla is found in his kingdom Asgard. Going back to the hooded apparition that was floating in the background at one point in the demo, it is very possible that this could be Loki, since his shapeshifting abilities are said to be unlimited. He can turn into anyone or any creature or animal regardless of their gender. Loki is of course the god of mischief and lies. He's the god that deliberately starts trouble just because he feels like it. Despite what Marvel would have you believe, Loki is actually Odin's brother in Norse mythology, not Thor's. This is contested in favour of the idea that they are merely brothers in blood oath, but that is another story altogether. Either way, Odin and Loki were actually very good friends, and when Odin needed something done that required brains instead of brawn, he would usually send Loki. He was excellent as a spy, thief and negotiator, which again lends some credence to the theory that the hooded figure was Loki. However, his mercurial nature would lead him to having a very on and off relationship with the gods and becoming more of an anti-hero that would either use his trickery to aid them or be a huge thorn in their side. So I fully expect Loki to be on his own side instead of Odin's, even if it appears otherwise. I can definitely see Loki being the secondary antagonist that either causes trouble for the Norse gods or Kratos, depending on his mood. If Kratos' son ever finds out about his father's past, chances are it'll be through Loki. A good example of the dichotomous relationship that he shared with the gods is the story behind the creation of Thor's hammer Mjolnir. He cut all of Sif's hair off from her head because in his mind all of the pride over it warranted a lesson in humility. After Thor got really mad at him, Loki commissioned a group of dwarves to make a crown of hair for Sif, but he went an extra step further in order to make up for what he did and got them to make 2 more special items. These were Gungnir, a spear that would be presented to Odin, and a ship named Skidbladnir, which could be folded like a piece of cloth and put in your pocket. The latter could certainly end up being used by Kratos as a way of getting around the more open-ended environments. But this wasn't enough for the god of mischief. He tricked 2 other dwarves, who happened to be brothers, into making more special items. This was by telling them that he doesn't think that they would be able to forge 3 new creations equal to what had already been crafted. One of the brothers was thought to be the finest craftsman that had ever existed, so Loki took advantage of the pride that he had and knew he wouldn't be able to resist. Mjolnir was one of these creations, and so was Gullinbursti, which was a golden boar that the god Freyr was given. Gullinbursti could glow in the dark and run better than any horse. It could also traverse over any terrain including water and even fly. So while Loki had been mischievous in cutting Sif's hair, he managed to get away with it after what he did for Asgard. Who knows, maybe this is the story of how Kratos' axe was made, and I'm pretty sure it will have its own official name in ancient Norse. The axe was said to have a long history that connects some of the characters, and something like this would certainly fit the bill. It definitely looks like something made by master craftsmen, and these were the dwarves in Norse mythology. Some of them even had magical powers, which they would use to add special powers to their creations, like say the ability to manipulate ice. If you look in the distance of this shot here at one of the toys, you'll notice an odd looking horse with more than 4 legs. This might very well be Sleipnir, which Odin uses to ride across the sky, and the story of how it came to be also goes back to Loki when he helped with building the walls of Asgard. When the brick mason demanded an unreasonable price for building them, Loki made a deal with him to build it in 6 months, thinking it impossible. When it looked like he was going to finish it on time, Loki turned into a female horse and seduced the mason's horse away from him, which reduced his progress significantly. The love child of this matchup was Sleipnir, the 8-legged horse. I have seen some criticise the homogeneous nature of Sony's exclusives at this year's E3 after games like God of War, Horizon and Days Gone. But I think the environments that we saw in the E3 demo was just one of the many different locations that we'll visit, and that we'll see environments that look a lot more visually distinctive in the final game. Barlog said that they are going to be delivering on an even grander sense of adventure than the previous games did because they have the 9 realms this time. The God of War games were always about going on an expansive adventure with environments that had a grand sense of scale, and it sounds like this one will be no different. So for those of you that don't know, there are indeed 9 realms in Norse mythology, and it was confirmed that some of them will be in the game. The 9 realms are held in the branches and the roots of the world tree Yggdrasil, and they are divided into 3 levels. Ever since E3, I had been wondering how they would handle transportation between the 9 realms. I thought maybe it would be through a portal. Apparently the tree was used as a means of getting between the worlds, and Odin rode Sleipnir up and down the trunk and through its branches on his journeys throughout the realms. This sounds a bit cartoony to me though, and I don't know how they would depict this realistically, so I don't know how they'll handle it. Maybe they'll find a way to make it look awesome, but I wouldn't be surprised if they did something else entirely. It's safe to say that the demo that we saw takes place in Midgard, otherwise known as Earth. Midgard is found on the middle level of the tree below Asgard and is the home of the humans. It's said that a huge ocean that is impassable surrounds Midgard, and we might have seen a glimpse of it at the very end behind the Midgard serpent. All sorts of monsters, fairies, trolls and gods would cause trouble for humans on Midgard. So it seems like there will be loads of other creatures that live here, as it was said that this game takes place in a time before they became extinct. Midgard is connected to Asgard via the Bifrost Bridge, which looks like a rainbow. Asgard is on the first level of the world tree, high up in the sky, and is of course the home of the Norse gods and Odin's kingdom. One of Asgard's most well-known locations is Valhalla. Valhalla is this enormous hall where only the greatest warriors are taken. This is to ensure that Odin has the best soldiers by his side at Ragnarok. So you start to see a common theme here, and how much Norse mythology builds up to the end of all things, quite fitting for the God of War series if you ask me. Valhalla is said to be a place of perpetual fighting, where soldiers fight all day and then get resurrected in the evening if they die. It's all about further sharpening their skills. Another realm in the first level of the tree is Vanaheim, the home of the Vanir gods. Unbeknownst to most people, there are actually 2 separate pantheons of gods in Norse mythology, the Aesir and the Vanir. Odin is the king of the Aesir, which are the chief family of gods that Thor and Loki belong to, while the Vanir gods include gods like Freya, her twin brother Freyr, and their father Njord. Both pantheons eventually unite after the war that takes place between them, so depending on when the game takes place in the timeline, we'll see them being either united or separate. The runes that Freya and Freyr are associated with can also be found on the logo. The second rune on the bottom right is called Ingwars and is translated as Angel the god Ing, which was said to be a name of Freyr. Freya's rune is on the left centre and it means love, partnership and forgiveness. While it's said that Frigg was married to Odin, it's theorised by many that Frigg is the same person as Freya since they originate from the same goddess and they both have very similar powers. So for the sake of simplicity, I'll be referring to just Freya. Vanaheim itself is depicted as a lush forest with dangerous vegetation. So why does Kratos journey to Vanaheim? Well, it's said that the Vanir are masters of sorcery and magic, and they are widely recognised for their talent to predict the future. Freya in particular was a noted master of cider, which is a form of magic that involves discerning and altering the course of destiny. As a result, it was seen as quite possibly the greatest power in the universe. So you can see where the power of prophecy comes in, since the practice of cider allows her to essentially see the future. The Norns are known as the foremost masters of cider, since they are the ones that decide the earliest form of destinies of every human, animal and god by carving runes. Whenever a child is born, the Norns carve their fate, which is where it gets even more interesting. So let's go with my theory and say that it's carved that Kratos' son becomes responsible for the end of the Norse gods, in the same way Kratos was for the Greek gods and Zeus was for the Titans. It's certainly within the realm of possibility, since he descends from a line of usurpers and god-killers. This would also explain why his son has marks on his face, since I'm pretty sure that this would have put a huge target on his back for Odin. Kratos would have a reason to go to Alfheim and Vanaheim to consult Freya or another Vanir god in order to get them to alter the course of his son's destiny by practicing cider. Going to the Norns would also be a last resort, since they are located somewhere deep in Asgard. Despite the concept of destiny playing a huge part in Norse mythology, there is another convenient difference between the Norse and Greek concepts, which could also make this one different. Unlike the Greek concept of fate, all beings subject to destiny also have a degree of free will. Practicing magic is an active way of shaping your own destiny and the destiny of others, but it is also possible to do it passively through your own actions if they are strong enough. At the end of the day, the Norns only decide the earliest form of everyone's fate. So while it was said that the game is about what gets passed on from parent to child, I think another main theme will be about what you are destined to be versus who you choose to become. So even if it is initially carved that Kratos' son will bring about Ragnarok, that doesn't mean it will definitively happen, unlike the case with Zeus and the Titans and Kratos with the Greek gods. This then goes back to what I said earlier about Kratos' son being the so-called Mighty One instead.
I believe we make our own fate.
Alfheim is also related to the Vanir gods since Freyr rules over it. It's located right next to Asgard, so it's a bit further away than Vanaheim is. I could be wrong, but the statues that we see in Alfheim might very well be a depiction of Freya. I have seen some people say that the hooded figure in the background resembles the statues from the concept art, so it might very well be a Vanir god instead of Loki. They could see the future after all, so they would have a reason to keep an eye on Kratos' son. Despite Freyr being in charge, Alfheim is actually the home of the Light Elves in Norse mythology. Apparently the concept art referred to it as the land of the fairies, and in Old Norse texts, that is also what it's called. So it might be a mashup of the two, where the fairies have an elvish look to them. You might be wondering why Freyr is the ruler then, and it was because the Light Elves and the Vanir gods had a long history together, even though their relationship was quite ambiguous. There is a chance that we saw one of them in Midgard when we saw the blue-looking creature in the distance flying with what looks to be some sort of staff in its hand. The Light Elves are minor gods that can either help or hinder humans with their knowledge of magic, so I wouldn't be surprised to see Kratos get a new magical ability in this realm. We also get more hints of the open-ended nature of the environments, as well as how big they are compared to Kratos, so the great sense of scale would definitely still be there. It's kind of funny how no one picked up on there being a boy behind Kratos consistently in the concept art, and the fact that the words "my boy" in Shinobi's tease on Twitter was actually referring to his son. Next up is Niflheim, which is the world of fog and mist. It is the darkest and coldest realm and one of the two primordial worlds. The main reason I'm bringing it up is because Barlog directly mentioned Helheim in an interview, so we know it exists in the God of War universe, and Helheim is found underground in Niflheim. Helheim is said to be very cold just like the realm it's located in, and it is the underworld in Norse mythology. It's where you go to after you die if you are not worthy of being in Valhalla. It is very similar to the underworld in Greek mythology, which Hades had dominion over. This time, however, it is ruled by a goddess who goes by the name Hel, and I will talk about her later on in the enemies section. This might have been a Christian addition, but it was said at one point that there was a part of Helheim that was reserved for the worst type of people. This area was called Nastrond, otherwise known as the Shore of Corpses. So it's kind of like Tartarus in Greek mythology. It's the place where the murderers, perjurers and the adulterers go to, and the dragon Nidhogg chews on their corpses, causing them to suffer until the end of time. Humans and gods would sometimes journey to Helheim in the hope of bringing someone back to life or obtaining knowledge from the dead. Muspelheim is the second primordial world and the complete opposite of Niflheim. It is the land of fire and heat and is found in the far south. It's said to be a burning hot place filled with lava, flames, sparks and soot. Muspelheim is the home of the fire giants and demons, and it is ruled by the fire giant Sur. It plays a big part in the creation narrative, as Ymir was born from the meeting of ice and fire in the Ganuga Gap from Niflheim and Muspelheim respectively. Niflheim was to the north, and Muspelheim was to the south of the Ganuga Gap, which was basically a vast primordial void that existed before the beginning of everything. Nidavellir is the home of the dwarves, and they are the masters of craftsmanship in the Norse universe. The dwarves live underground in fancy citadels and lust after things like gold and gems. Since they are underground, they use the hearts of the volcanoes there to forge weapons. Regardless of its story, I'm willing to bet that this is where Kratos' axe was forged. Some of the dwarves even had magical powers which they would use to add special powers to their creations, like the ability to manipulate ice and lightning. The Norse gods received many powerful gifts from them, like Thor's hammer Mjolnir and Odin's spear Gungnir. Jotunheim is the home of the giants, otherwise known as the Jotuns, and they were the first living beings. The first Jotun was Ymir, who was slain by Odin to forge the world. The giants are the sworn enemy of the Norse gods, and they are constantly fighting, but love affairs also happened between them too. Jotunheim exists in a very cold, inhospitable landscape that mostly consists of rocks, wilderness, snowy mountains, and deep dark forests. According to Barlog, the boss fights in this game will be bigger than anything we've ever seen before. After the kind of bosses that we had in God of War 3, this would certainly be quite the feat. We saw some evidence of this when people astutely pointed out a massive snake moving in the background, which I missed out on the first time. I initially thought it was a hill covered in snow. The snake that we saw is known as Jormungandr, or by his nickname the Midgard Serpent, and this leads us onto his story. The story begins when Loki has an affair with the giantess Angerboda. They had 3 children, which were described as fearfully hideous and strong. They were Jormungandr, the giantess Hel, and the wolf Fenrir. When the gods discovered what's happened, they freaked out because it was prophesied that these 3 children would help bring about doom at Ragnarok. So Odin ordered that they be brought before him so that he could decide their fate. Odin cast Jormungandr into the ocean where he would circle around Midgard, hence why you saw him in the demo, and this was also how he got his nickname. Every time he ate, he grew in size, and with his insatiable appetite, he got so big that he could coil his entire body around the planet, which would also explain why he was moving so slowly. Given his size, he could raise tsunamis and cause tempests in the ocean that were capable of drowning sailors. The giantess Hel was relegated to the underworld and put in charge of the realm of the dead known as Helheim. She would spend her time watching over those that got sent to her, and they were usually the wicked or the ones who had died of sickness or old age. Her rune is also found on the God of War logo at the end of the trailer if you look at the top center. It is called the Hagalaz rune, and it means damaging natural forces and disruption. Hel herself was said to be a very horrible person, but who can really blame her? I would be feeling really bitter too if I was thrown into the underworld for the rest of my life to look after the dead. It is said that one half of her looks dead and the other half is beautiful, which should make for a pretty awesome character design. She would later refuse to release the god Balder from the underworld after Loki killed him. She raises an army of the dead against the gods to help destroy the world at Ragnarok, and it's likely that we'll come up against this army if Kratos has to journey to Helheim at one point. Hel will use her ship Naglfar, which is built with the nails of the dead, and she sides with the leader of the fire demon Sur. Much like the Cerberus from Greek myth, the entrance to Helheim is guarded by a dog named Garma the Hellhound, who howls every time someone new arrives. Garma is described as being to canines what Odin is to gods and what Yggdrasil is to trees, which makes him a good candidate for being another epic boss fight. Alternatively, he might be treated as a beast race like the Cerberus was in the previous God of War games, where you encountered multiple smaller ones. The concept actually reminds me a lot of the watchdog of the Old Lord's boss from Bloodborne. Nidhogg, the giant dragon, is another beast that lives in Hell, though he's in a deeper part called Nastrond, where he chews on the dead as part of their punishment. One of the roots of the tree Yggdrasil is also found there, which he chews on and is trapped under. He also sides with the giants in Ragnarok, but that's if Kratos hasn't killed him first. This leaves Fenrir the Wolf, who inspired too much fear in the gods for them to let him go from under their watchful eye. In addition to devouring the sun and moon at Ragnarok, he would also kill Odin himself. They took him in order to try and tame his savage nature. Fenrir grew at a very fast rate, however, which scared the gods even more, so they decided that he couldn't stay in Asgard forever. Because of how much chaos he would cause if he was allowed to roam free, they tried to come up with ways to tie him down, but they failed twice. The gods went to the dwarves for help, who crafted the strongest chain ever built, which gave the appearance of looking very light and soft to the touch. He was tied up by the gods to a boulder and left in a remote, desolate swamp with a sword in his mouth to hold his jaws open. Fenrir actually inspired a boss named after Sif in the first Dark Souls game, but I expect him to be way bigger this time around. So depending on the timeline, we might see him in Asgard or somewhere else entirely. The Lord of the Fire Demon Sur is another potential boss. He is the sworn enemy of the Norse gods and lives in Muspelheim, the home of his children, the Fire Giants. His weapon of choice is a huge flaming sword called Lavoltine that is capable of setting the whole world on fire. I wouldn't be surprised if Kratos gets to wield this sword as an alternate weapon if he fights Sur at some point in the game. He is the main force behind the opposing army at Ragnarok, and he is destined to kill the god Freyr. There is an interesting theory out there that says that he is the single oldest surviving being in the 9 worlds, and that it was Sur who acted as a catalyst for the creation of life. Emerging from the darkness of the Gnuga Gap, he touched the land with his flaming sword and created the realm of fire. The fire then drew close enough to Niflheim, the realm of ice, which led to Ymir being born. Where Saul came from or what's brought him forth is a complete mystery, as it wasn't explained. The reason why I find it interesting is because it aligns with his ideals in wanting to return the cosmos to the way things were with the chaos of the Gnuga Gap. It would be an interesting avenue in which to explore the idea of a god that has grown so frustrated and mad at what he's created. That is not to say that they're going to go in this direction with his character, but it is a possibility. The Abyss was said to be the ultimate destination that the giants wanted to return the world to, and Saul was at the forefront of this. Moving on to the lower level enemies, next up we have the Trolls. Trolls have their own culture and language, and there are several different species, so not all of them will look like the one that we saw. The troll that we saw in the demo wasn't even a mini-boss, they were said to be the Cyclops type enemies from the previous games. So if that is the size of a troll, I can only imagine how big the Jotuns will look. Cory also explained a bit more about what was going on in the demo itself. It turns out that the troll that you fought discovered one of his kind with his skin cut off being processed for food at the camp that Kratos later stumbles upon. So he gets mad and kills everyone there, then goes to the forest and kills the remaining humans, and this is why you see some of the trees all cut and burnt. He waits afterwards for anyone else to come back just in case, to make sure that everyone pays for what's happened, so Kratos and his son just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. So when he says to Kratos that he won't enter Valhalla, I think it was just an insult as opposed to a hint to where Kratos is going. So you are already starting to see all of these different sides and viewpoints, which goes back to what I was saying about God of War 2's story earlier and my hopes of them taking this to another level. It seems like environmental storytelling is also going to play quite a big part, which doesn't really surprise me though, considering the more open-ended nature of the game. It's also another reason why the camera is better off being controlled by the player. The Draga are undead warriors forced to wander Midgard because they were never picked up by the Valkyries to go to Valhalla and they were never sent to Helheim. They were described as the common base level grunts that we would typically see in the form of skeletal warriors. Quite the significant upgrade if you ask me when you look at their size and how much more intimidating they look. It is important to note that while Norse mythology might hold the answers to some of our questions, the God of War games have never rigidly stuck to mythological stories. The Draga, for instance, are completely original characters, so I cannot wait to see what else Sony Santa Monica have in store for us. I also have no doubt that Kratos will be a giant influence in changing what happens. The original core team that created the God of War franchise were brought back to help with reimagining it, including those that worked on the Blades of Chaos. So for those of you that might still have reservations about the axe, know that it's coming from the people that made the combat system so special in the first place. At its core, God of War's combat has always been about managing your close, mid and far space. It was said that the axe can help you do this just like the Blades of Chaos could, but in its own way. You can throw it, beat another enemy with your bare fists, press a separate button to call it back in the middle of a combo, and get a different move for a mid-range attack. As I said in my previous video, the combat does remind me a bit of a more cinematic version of the one from Dark Souls. The fact that the right shoulder buttons are now being used for attacks instead cements this further. It also goes back to why the blades can't return, because it would be weird when they were previously associated with the face buttons. They wanted to create an entirely different gameplay loop, and implementing a new weapon allowed them to do this. This is definitely something that I thought was warranted, given how the previous formula started to show its age by Ascension. The axe itself is said to be a very important artifact in the overall story, with a long history that connects to Kratos' family and other characters. The weapon upgrade system has completely been overhauled, and there was actually evidence of this in the gameplay trailer that completely flew over my head. If you look at Kratos' axe in this shot here, you'll notice all of these different lines on it with all of these permutations. This was said to be the structure for upgrading Kratos' axe and customizing his fighting style, so what you're looking at here is a much deeper and more varied system when compared to what we've had before. I guess you could say it's the next logical step from what they started in Ascension when the look of the blades reflected the upgrade system. It was also hinted that Kratos will get different weapons as you progress throughout the game, and this shouldn't come as a surprise because this was also the case in the previous God of War games. And you can bet that you'll be able to unlock new combos as you upgrade your weapons like you could in the previous ones. Most of the combos that you unlock will probably depend on the fighting style that you are upgrading, so I am sure that there are tons of other movesets with the axe that we haven't seen yet. It was confirmed by the developers that the axe will have other uses outside of combat as well. This was something that the concept art alluded to, and it was said that you can throw it to places that you otherwise wouldn't be able to get to and use it when platforming. For instance, in the foresty area of Vanaheim, you can throw the axe to cut vines in order to create bridges. There was also something about Kratos stepping on lily pads in the right sequence, and that he has the ability to climb through cracks, which instantly reminded me of Metal Gear Solid 5 for some reason. So we have more evidence that there will be quite a bit of platforming added into the mix too. It was said that the game has an element of specials when someone brought up the 3 icons on the top left hand corner. It wasn't talked about in detail, so we don't really know what it means, even though we know what the arrow icon refers to. He will attack with the arrows that you've selected wherever you're looking. So we know that lightning isn't the only kind of elemental power that he'll be able to wield. The icon on the left could very well be referring to the different magical abilities that you acquire over the course of the campaign. While I really enjoyed the way the previous games handled the fixed camera, an added advantage of having a free one is that it allows the player to do more complicated things like interacting with the AI and telling it what to do more effectively. It essentially makes up half of the equation when you're communicating with Kratos' son. When combined with the button dedicated to him, you can get him to do certain things for you. So if you look at a door, he will open it for you, or if you look at a certain enemy and press his button, he will attack them for you with his arrows. If you look at a puzzle, he will also help you with it, so I expect to see some puzzles that require both Kratos and his son to do something. He is said to be very competent in battle and won't be a nuisance to the player, in the sense that you won't always have to worry about him. Even though it wasn't shown, because I presume it's a bit later on in the game, he will be able to maneuver around the battlefield on his own and try to split and control it so that you can have an easier time. For example, when you start getting into fights with larger groups of enemies and you want to focus on just one while a bunch of lesser targets try to distract you, he will try to split the battlefield by taking the attention of the weaker enemies. And as you upgrade him, he'll get better and will start to do more things for you automatically. It was said that there can be up to 100 enemies on screen, which I was glad to read, as I was a bit worried that this wasn't going to be the case with how close and personal the camera is now. God of War 3 made quite a big deal about having all of these enemies on screen, and I'm glad that they're carrying on with this. Sometimes his son will be the one that gets overwhelmed instead, as there are other enemies that will specifically target him, which is quite interesting. So there will be moments when you are the one that needs to help him out, but these are probably few and far between. He's essentially like magic, an additional combat resource, but you will be training and teaching him along the way, which the upgrade system and his in-game actions will reflect. It was also confirmed that there will be no multiplayer. This is probably a good thing though, because while I enjoyed what Ascension's multiplayer had to offer, it is my understanding that the single player suffered because of resources and time being dedicated to something else. God of War is first and foremost a single player game, so I'm glad that they're focusing on making the campaign the best it can possibly be. If anyone is up to the task of reimagining the series, it's definitely Cory, and I was glad to hear that they brought back the core team from the original game. He compared the transition to this new God of War to the one that took place from Resident Evil 3 to 4, as opposed to being heavily influenced by The Last of Us. I'm pretty confident that they are onto something special here, and that the game will end up being outstanding. I cannot wait to see what else Sony Santa Monica have up their sleeve as we play the anticipation game from now up until release. Now that it looks like we've entered into a temporary drought for new information, at least up until the next conference or whatever, I'm planning to keep the God of War momentum going by looking back at the previous 6 games. I was thinking of going back and reviewing them all, and also talking about the history of the series behind the scenes, as well as Kratos himself. Let me know if this is something that you would be interested in seeing, and whether you have any other suggestions. If they drop any more new information, I'll be sure to let you guys know. Cory tweeted last week that he was on sets filming scenes for the game, so we still have quite a while before the game comes out. I still think it's coming out in late 2017, but there is a chance that we won't see it until early 2018. If you enjoyed this video, which I assume is the case if you've made it this far, please share it and give it a like, it would really help me out. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.